Hi guys. Tonight, we slip backward through time into a world that smells of smoke, damp wool, and candle wax. You stand at the edge of a dirt road, the stars so sharp they look like frost. Somewhere, a church bell tolls, not from electricity or schedule, but from the rhythm of prayer and fear. There is no hum of traffic, no glowing phone in your hand, just the creak of wood, the chill in your lungs, and the distant bark of a dog that may not survive the week. You probably will not survive this either, at least not for long. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Tell me in the comments where you are listening from, and what time it is for you right now. Now, dim the lights and follow me. The air tastes of wood smoke and dung, a kind of perfume for the poor. You are in the Middle Ages now, centuries before antibiotics or plumbing, when the word comfort meant a good blanket and a roof that did not leak too badly. Your shoes are thin leather, cracked and stiff, your feet already cold. The road beneath you is not a road at all, but packed mud streaked with animal waste and the prints of cart wheels. You realize that nothing around you hums, blinks, or shines. Silence is not peaceful here. It is heavy. A rooster crows somewhere too early, and you wonder how anyone sleeps through that. But people do, because exhaustion is a constant companion. The average peasant worked from sunrise to sunset, 6 days a week, pausing only for church on Sunday. You think about your modern coffee machine, your pillow, your alarm clock that lets you snooze twice before facing the world. In this life, the day begins when the sun says so, and ends only when darkness swallows the fields. You pass by a cottage that leans like a tired man. Inside, an entire family shares a single bed stuffed with straw. The smell is sour but strangely warm. You notice the walls, made of mud, mixed with straw and animal hair, trembling slightly when the wind hits. They call it wattle and daub. You call it barely there. You are thirsty already, but the water from the barrel outside looks brownish. Someone has dropped in a handful of herbs, hoping to mask the flavor of bacteria no one can see. Historians still argue whether most medieval people truly understood waterborne illness, but everyone understood the consequences of bad luck, diarrhea that could kill within days. A church tower looms in the distance, the cross above it gleaming faintly in the moonlight. Every decision here, from birth to burial, passes through that building. It is the center of faith, gossip, punishment, and hope. You hear chanting in Latin, and you do not understand a word. Few people do, but you bow your head, because not bowing could be dangerous. Somewhere beyond the fields, wolves cry. You wonder if they are closer than they sound. The villagers hang garlic on their doors, not to keep away vampires, though some believe in those too, but to keep away the smell of rot and sickness. You clutch your thin cloak tighter, realizing that warmth itself is a kind of privilege. You look at your hands, blistered from a single day of work. In the Middle Ages, calluses are not a flaw but a signature of survival. Soft hands mean idleness, or worse, nobility without protection. You remember the strange fact that many peasants were shorter not by genetics, but by malnutrition. The diet lacked vitamins, and bones grew crooked with hunger. Some modern historians debate whether medieval peasants were as miserable as we imagine, pointing to festivals, music, and moments of laughter. But you can feel the fatigue in your limbs. Joy here is a spark, not a flame. Night deepens. The village dogs stop barking. Someone coughs behind a thin wall, a hacking sound that could mean anything from a cold to the plague. You want to offer them medicine, but there is none. Maybe a poultice made of crushed herbs and honey. Maybe a prayer. A rat scurries across the floor, bold as royalty. It pauses to look at you, then disappears into a hole near the hearth. You think of the future. You came from the screens, the lights, the endless choices, and realize how fragile comfort really is. Civilization is only a few candles away from darkness. There is a tenderness to this world, too, if you can slow down enough to see it. A mother hums beside the fire, a child asleep on her lap. A man mends a shoe by moonlight, humming a song about harvests long gone. A girl braids her hair and wonders if the knight who passed last week might remember her face. People dream here, even if their dreams end at the village boundary. You step outside again. The night has turned colder, and frost glitters like powdered glass on the thatched roofs. You can smell iron from the blacksmith's hut, even though the forge is dark now. In a few hours, he will wake, heat the coals, and hammer life into shape again. His lungs will fill with soot, his back will twist with time. But his work will last centuries: door hinges, horseshoes, tools for hands that will never know his name. You start to walk toward the church, your breath visible, each exhale a tiny ghost. For a moment, you wonder what would happen if you stayed here, if somehow you were trapped. No electricity, no medicine, no food unless you earn it, no choice unless granted. You would probably last 3 days before hunger or disease took notice. Yet, as the bell rings again, deep and haunting, you feel something strange. The sound is not mechanical. It is alive, metal and motion. Man and meaning fuse together. You close your eyes. The vibration settles into your chest, as if the past is reminding you that humanity survives not by comfort, but by endurance. Tomorrow you will wake with the others, aching but alive, to face a world that never heard of convenience. And somewhere inside, a quiet respect grows for those who lived, worked, and died under the same stars you see tonight. You wake to the sound of roosters before the sun has even stretched across the horizon. The smell of smoke lingers from the night fire, half choked in the damp air. Your throat feels dry, rough, and your first thought is of water. But the bucket beside the door looks cloudy, flecks of dirt swirling like lazy ghosts. You decide to wait. The world around you is colorless at dawn. Shades of brown and grey blend into each other, a palette of survival. You feel the weight of your blanket, woven from coarse wool that scratches your neck. It is heavy, but not warm. Someone nearby snores softly. In this cottage, privacy is an idea, not a reality. The whole family sleeps together, along with chickens tucked in a corner for warmth. You shift, and a hen clucks irritably. There is no bathroom to escape to. You step outside, your breath white in the air, and find a spot behind the fence. A pig grunts at you, unimpressed by your embarrassment. You finish quickly, pulling your rough tunic straight, the fabric stiff with dirt. This is what passes for modesty here. You miss running water with a sudden ache that feels almost luxurious in memory. Inside, breakfast is more ritual than nourishment. A heel of bread so hard you must soak it in weak ale to chew. The ale is safer than the water, mildly fermented to kill the unseen things that make people sick. Historians still debate whether medieval peasants were constantly tipsy. But the truth is less entertaining. The brew is weak, barely alcoholic, more a liquid bread than a party drink. You sip it and try not to think about what floated it before. The room brightens slowly as the fire crackles back to life. Smoke curls up through a hole in the thatch, leaving the walls blackened with soot. It smells of oak and grease, mixed with something faintly sour. You run your hand along the table, feel the rough grain of wood cut by hand, not polished, just functional. You hear the shuffle of others outside. The day begins early, because daylight is the only tool you have. No lamps to switch on, no electricity to stretch the hours. When the sun fades, so does work. You pull on your boots, damp from yesterday's mud, and tie them with strips of leather. They do not match, and one sole is cracked. Still, they will have to do. Outside, the village yawns awake. Smoke rises from chimneys, thin and blue. A child chases a goose with laughter that sounds out of place in this grey morning. You follow the narrow path toward the fields, stepping over puddles that reflect the sky like dull metal. Each step reminds you that comfort is not a birthright, but a miracle of plumbing, heating, and rest. You pass a neighbor bending over a trough, washing his face with icy water. He nods, teeth chattering, then wipes his beard with his sleeve. His hands are cracked, the nails black with soil. People here are stitched together by endurance, not convenience. Somewhere down the lane, a cart creaks. The driver curses at the mule, and you catch the familiar scent of manure. It fills every corner of the countryside, soaked into boots, hands, and clothing. No one here is clean by modern standards. They cannot be. Soap is rare, made from lye and animal fat. It stings the skin and leaves you smelling faintly like a candle. You head toward the fields where men and women already work, their backs bent like questions no one can answer. The soil is cold, stubborn after a night of frost. You grab a wooden hoe and begin to loosen the earth. The tool is heavier than it looks, rough against your palms. After a few strokes, you feel the burn in your arms. You remember gym workouts and realize how gentle they were by comparison. Work in the Middle Ages does not pause for fatigue. The rhythm of labor is dictated by survival. Plow, sow, harvest, repeat. You glance at the sky, hoping for clouds that promise rain but not too much. One wrong season, one plague of insects, and your entire year collapses. You begin to understand why medieval people prayed so often. Faith is not just belief, it is insurance against despair. By midday, your tunic is damp with sweat. The sun, weak as it is, bakes your neck. Someone hands you a bowl of pottage, a kind of stew made of barley, leeks, and whatever scraps survived the winter. It smells earthy, tastes bland, but fills your stomach. You chew slowly, aware that flavor is a modern indulgence. A few drops of oil would be luxury, a bit of salt a treasure. You recall that salt was once as valuable as gold. It preserved life, quite literally. Nearby, a man jokes that the bread this year is hard enough to stop a sword. You laugh, but he is not wrong. Bread is baked thick and dark, made with coarse flour that still contains grit. It wears down teeth over time. Many adults in the Middle Ages had mouths full of decay by their 30s. Historians still argue whether this was from sugar's later arrival or from the grinding stones contaminating flour with sand. Either way, you feel grateful for your dentist, whoever they are. Afternoon fades to a cooler gold. You straighten up, stretching your back, feeling the ache spread across your shoulders. Around you, life continues in rhythm. The swing of tools, the murmur of voices, the call of a shepherd to his flock. It is almost beautiful in its simplicity, until you realize no one here can afford to stop. Evening brings a soft exhaustion. You return to the cottage, hands trembling slightly. Dinner is much like breakfast, only warmer. The fire crackles, and you huddle close, the heat kissing your face. A child sleeps curled like a cat by the hearth. Someone hums a slow tune, half prayer, half lullaby. You stare at the flickering shadows on the wall, shapes dancing like ghosts of comfort. You imagine your modern home a warm shower, clean sheets, the soft hum of a refrigerator, and feel a pang of guilt for every complaint you have ever made about slow Wi-Fi. Outside, the night folds over the village again, and you lie back on your straw mattress. It rustles, poking through the thin linen. Something scurries nearby, probably a mouse. You close your eyes anyway. The smell of smoke and earth fills your lungs. Comfort, you realize, is not just about softness or warmth. It is about choice, the power to say no, to rest, to stop. And here, in this century, that power does not belong to you. You wake with the smell of smoke in your hair and the taste of ashes on your tongue. The air inside the cottage is heavy, the kind that clings to the throat and makes every breath feel borrowed. Today begins, as every day does, with hunger. You glance at the loaf of bread from yesterday, its crust dark and hard as stone. You knock on it with a knuckle, and it sounds like wood. Still, it is food, and that means life. Records from the time reveal that bread was the center of almost every meal. Wheat bread was for the rich, barley and rye for everyone else. You break a piece and chew slowly, jaw aching. The taste is faintly sour, a reminder that yeast is not the soft, fluffy miracle you know. It is wild, unpredictable, and sometimes brings more sickness than strength. You sip a bit of thin ale to soften it, watching the bread sink into the cloudy liquid before taking another bite. An odd little detail often overlooked is that people sometimes mixed ground beans, acorns, or even sawdust into their flour when times were hard. Hunger has no pride. You try to imagine that flavor, and it makes your stomach twist. Your neighbor steps inside, carrying a small bucket from the stream. The water looks innocent until you see the bits of grass and silt swirling on top. You hesitate, but thirst wins. It tastes of iron and decay. People in this age boiled water only when desperate. Most believed that bad smells carried disease, not invisible creatures. The idea of bacteria will not exist for centuries. Modern scholars puzzle over why some villages seemed healthier than others, though luck and local water sources likely played a part. Outside, the day grows brighter. A woman spreads grain across a cloth, shaking off small stones. You help her sort it, hands numb from the cold. Each handful feels like treasure. When she smiles, her teeth are darkened with age and grit. You realize that even chewing is an act of courage here. By midday, the village comes alive with smells that mix in strange harmony. Smoke, onion, cabbage, and dung. You follow the scent of boiling stew, thick with lentils. The pot bubbles over a fire fed with peat and wood scraps. It smokes badly, coating everything in a thin layer of soot. The cook stirs with a stick and says nothing. The food is simple, bland, but safe. One curious custom of the time was to leave a crust of bread on the table as an offering for the poor or for spirits who might bless the home. You see one now, a small slice resting beside the pot, stiff but sacred. Hunger here is constant, yet so is generosity in its quiet form. When evening arrives, someone brings in a jug of wine from the manor. It is sour and thin, but it burns pleasantly in your throat. The people drink, laugh, and trade stories. One man swears he once saw a carp with the face of a saint. No one believes him, yet everyone listens. The stories are as filling as the stew. According to surviving documents, feasts did happen, though rarely for common folk. On holy days or weddings, tables groaned under roasted meat, honeyed cakes, and spiced wine. Tonight is not such a day. Still, the villagers share what they have, passing the bowl, wiping their hands on rough cloth. You feel the warmth of the fire and forget for a moment the filth outside. The conversation turns to sickness. A child down the lane has been vomiting, and the women cross themselves. Some say it is punishment for working on the Sabbath. Others blame the miller for hoarding grain. The truth, of course, lies in the unseen germs of the water, but they do not know that yet. You sip your ale slowly, realizing how fragile life feels here. Experts remain divided on how far malnutrition shaped the medieval body. Some skeletons show surprising strength, others the scars of famine. You imagine your own reflection shrinking, the cheeks hollowing, the eyes growing distant. Hunger here is not a crisis, it is a companion. As the night deepens, you watch a woman knead dough near the fire. Her hands move slowly, rhythmically, pressing life into the future. The dough hisses as it touches the hot pan. You can almost taste it already, smoky, bitter, dense. She hums a melody, soft and strange. It sounds like hope wearing a ragged dress. Outside, the moon climbs high over the rooftops. You hear dogs bark and the faint rustle of rats near the grain stores. You remember what someone said earlier, that a single spoiled sack could feed a family of vermin for weeks. You think of all the food wasted in your world and feel a quiet shame. You step into the night again. The air is sharp, the stars mercilessly clear. Hunger fades, replaced by wonder. For all its hardship, this world is alive in a way yours no longer feels. Every mouthful matters, every sip is a gamble, every crumb a story. You close your eyes, hearing the faint laughter from inside, the soft crackle of fire, and you understand that survival here is not about comfort or taste, but the quiet defiance of going on, one rough bite at a time. You wake to a coughing sound that rattles the quiet morning. The air inside the cottage feels damp, thick with the scent of mud and smoke. Someone has already gone to fetch water, and when they return, you can smell it before you see it. A faint stench of algae and rot clings to the bucket. You dip a cup in and hesitate. The surface reflects your face like a ghostly blur, and you realize that drinking is an act of faith. It is well established that most people in the Middle Ages lived surrounded by filth they could not see as dangerous. Human waste was dumped into open ditches, sometimes into the same streams where people washed clothes or filled their drinking jugs. The streets were muddy rivers of refuse, especially after rain. No one called it pollution, but everyone smelled it. You carry a small pitcher outside, careful to step around the puddles. The air smells of damp earth and manure. Chickens pick through scraps, clucking with the patience of those who know no better world. A dog sniffs the edge of a gutter, tail wagging as though this mess is paradise. A strangely endearing habit of the time involved tossing chamber pot contents directly into the street, often from an upper window. People would shout a warning in the local tongue, something like, "Mind yourself below!" But not always. You look up just as a neighbor empties her pot into the alley. The liquid splashes dangerously close to your boots, and she grins unapologetically. Life here is practical, not polite. You move toward the village well, a wooden structure slick with use. Several women stand in line, gossiping as they fill their buckets. One complains about her husband's smell, another about a rash her child has. You listen quietly. They have no soap that works well, no clean water to rinse away infection. Boiling takes precious firewood, and wood is wealth. Researchers continue to disagree about whether medieval towns were always filthy or whether some managed basic sanitation. Some cities, like Bruges or Florence, had early drainage systems and water channels, while others lived in perpetual stench. What is certain is that disease flourished wherever people and waste shared space. You feel a drop of water hit your cheek and look up, expecting rain. Instead, it drips from a thatched roof, dark and oily. The sky is grey, heavy with clouds. Rain means mud, and mud means sickness. You think of your modern world, where you can wash your hands without fear, drink from a tap without risk. Here, every sip might betray you. Inside again, someone sets a pot on the fire to heat water for washing. The pot hisses, steam curling upward like a ghost escaping. The smell of boiled metal fills the room. You take a cloth and wipe your face, feeling cleaner for a moment. The warmth seeps into your skin. According to surviving journals, most people rarely bathed fully. A quick rinse or sponge bath was the norm, and even that was suspect. Many believed that opening pores invited disease. Better to stay coated in dirt, protected by the very layer that disgusts you now. Nobles, when they did bathe, often added herbs and milk, thinking it would restore balance to the body's humours. You can almost picture it. A copper tub, petals floating on the surface, while servants carry buckets of steaming water. In the fields, men strip to their undershirts, splashing water from puddles onto their faces. The water glints in the weak sun, brown and thick. They laugh anyway. There is a strange joy in resilience, in knowing that this is life and no other is promised. An odd custom that persisted for centuries involved the belief that some waters could cure ailments if collected at dawn on a holy day. People travelled for miles to sacred springs, filling bottles in hope of healing. Whether superstition or intuition, these rituals tied the human spirit to nature, however dirty that nature might be. As the day warms, the village smell intensifies. You can almost taste it in the air. Smoke, sweat, decay. It clings to your clothes, your hair, your very skin. Clean is not an achievable state here. It is a fleeting illusion. You scratch your arm, noticing a red bump. Maybe a flea, maybe worse. Everyone here carries something that bites. No one fully agrees on how medieval people perceived cleanliness. Some scholars argue that dirt was accepted as normal, while others think people tried harder than we imagine, with herbs, vinegar, and scented oils. Perhaps both are true. You can smell rosemary burning in one cottage, a desperate attempt to mask what cannot be washed away. As night approaches, you walk near the stream. The moonlight glimmers on its surface, beautiful from afar. Then you notice the sheen of waste floating by, bits of straw and refuse. A frog croaks somewhere in the reeds. You bend down, dip your hand, and instantly regret it. The water feels alive in the wrong way. You step back, drying your fingers on your tunic. A cold breeze moves through the trees, carrying the scent of rot and pine needles. You breathe it in slowly, understanding at last that for the people of this world, filth is not a failing. It is simply the air they breathe, the water they drink, the soil they walk upon. You head home in silence. The stars faint behind the clouds. The firelight from the cottages flickers across the village like small, stubborn hearts refusing to go out. You crawl into bed, clutching your blanket, and whisper a small, modern prayer, gratitude for clean water, for soap, for the miracle of hygiene you once took for granted. Morning breaks with a pale light that creeps through the cracks of the shutters. The air smells of damp linen, smoke, and something sour that you cannot name. You sit up and stretch, feeling your tunic cling to your skin. It has not been washed in days. Neither has anyone else's. The fabric is rough, stiff in some places, and the seams bite against your shoulders. You rub at your neck and realize that comfort was never a part of fashion here. Contemporary sources consistently mention that clothing in the Middle Ages was more about function and social identity than beauty. A peasant's garments were made from wool or linen, spun and woven by hand. Every thread took hours of labor, often done by candlelight. You glance at your sleeves, noticing tiny patches where someone has mended them carefully. Nothing is wasted here. A single shirt could last years if repaired often enough. A curious detail from the time is that people often slept in their clothes, even during summer. The idea of nightwear had not yet arrived, and warmth was too precious to risk. You shift beneath the blanket, realizing you have done the same without meaning to. Your body smells of smoke and sweat, and though you long for a clean shirt, the one you wear will have to serve another week. You step outside and see women by the stream, washing garments by beating them with wooden paddles. The sound echoes through the valley, a steady rhythm of survival. The water is icy, and their fingers are red with cold. They joke quietly, voices low, as they wring out each cloth and hang it on nearby bushes to dry. Soap, when they have it, is made from animal fat and lye. It burns the skin, leaving hands cracked and raw. Experts remain divided on how colourful medieval life really looked. Paintings show vivid reds and blues, yet such dyes were expensive luxuries, often reserved for nobility. The poor wore shades of brown, grey, or faded green, colours born not of taste but of available plants and earth. You glance at a farmer's tunic dyed with onion skins, the faint yellow glowing faintly in the light. It is a small act of beauty in a colourless world. You watch as a merchant rides past, his cloak trimmed with fur. Heads turn. Clothing is not just fabric, it is identity, power, and permission. One law of the time even dictated who could wear what. Commoners were forbidden from dressing above their station. To wear silk or bright scarlet could bring punishment, even fines. You think of your modern closet, full of colours and fabrics from every continent, and feel the weight of freedom you never noticed before. An odd custom of the wealthy was to perfume their clothes heavily with rosewater or musk. Since baths were rare, the scent of flowers disguised the smell of sweat. You imagine a noblewoman sweeping through a hall, her gown trailing behind her like a whisper of gardens that no longer exist. People might bow as she passes, admiring her beauty, never knowing the layers of grime beneath the silk. You catch sight of a young tailor in the village square, sitting by a small fire. He mends a tear in a man's cloak, his needle moving so fast it gleams in the sun. According to written accounts, skilled tailors were often respected but poor, their work essential yet undervalued. You watch his hands work, thread pulling through cloth like rhythm in music. Each stitch is a prayer against decay. No one fully agrees on how comfortable medieval clothing truly was. Some historians claim it was surprisingly soft once broken in, while others point out that the constant dirt, fleas, and stiffness made daily wear almost unbearable. Perhaps both are true. You feel the texture against your arms again, and know that this fabric carries both labor and discomfort in every fiber. As the day warms, the village fills with color in its own subdued way. Children wear shirts too big for them, inherited from siblings or neighbors. Women walk with their skirts gathered high to avoid mud, revealing boots caked with earth. Men roll up their sleeves as they work, sweat glistening on their forearms. Every movement rustles fabric worn thin by time. One woman adjusts her headscarf, folding it neatly before tying it under her chin. It is white, or at least it was once. Head coverings are universal here, worn for modesty, warmth, or faith. You recall reading that even men kept their heads covered indoors, removing hats only for prayer or deference. To appear bareheaded was to appear naked in spirit. Evening comes softly. The air cools, and people gather by fires, talking, sewing, patching. A girl sits near you, mending a small tear in her dress. The light flickers across her face, and she hums a tune that seems to come from the earth itself. You watch the needle flash, the sound of thread pulling tight like a heartbeat. There is something strangely intimate about the fabric of this world. Each garment tells a story. Who made it? Who wore it? Who will inherit it next? You touch your sleeve again, tracing the uneven stitches someone once made by hand. The imperfection feels more human than anything you have worn before. You lie down that night, fully clothed again, the wool rough against your skin. You can smell smoke, grass, and your own sweat. Somewhere outside, a horse snorts, a dog barks. You close your eyes, imagining the smooth touch of cotton sheets, the whisper of a washing machine, the luxury of scentless cleanliness. Here, fashion is a burden, but also a bond. It ties you to the land, to the labor, and to the hands that shaped every thread you wear. The morning mist rolls over the fields like breath from a sleeping giant. You stretch and feel your back ache, your hands rough from yesterday's work. The air smells of wet soil and wood smoke. Somewhere, a rooster crows again, echoing through the valley. The world expects you to move, and in this age, expectation is law. It is well established that most medieval people worked from sunrise to sunset, often 7 days a week if the harvest demanded it. The rhythm of labor was the rhythm of survival. There were no weekends, no paydays to look forward to. Work was life itself. You look down at your blistered palms and realize how soft your modern hands once were. A curious detail from old manorial records tells of peasants being fined for stopping work too soon or for taking shelter in the shade during planting season. Rest was a luxury permitted only to those who owned others' time. You glance across the field and see an old man leaning on his hoe, his face turned toward the light. He stands still for only a heartbeat before a steward calls his name sharply. The soil beneath your feet feels heavy with dew, and each step sinks slightly. You begin to till, the wooden handle rough and splintered against your skin. Every motion sends a tremor through your shoulders. The earth smells sweet, but it hides stones that bruise your shins. The work is endless, but it is also steady, reliable in its pain. According to village accounts preserved by monks, most peasants owed labor to their lord instead of money. 3 days a week might belong to the fields of the manor, the rest to your own meagre plot. You are never free, only briefly borrowed. The steward rides by on horseback, inspecting the rows, his cloak stirring dust that clings to your skin. An odd little fact from the period is that animals often worked alongside humans in the same harnesses. Some towns even yoked women beside oxen when beasts were scarce. You imagine the weight of the plough pulling against your chest, the rope biting into your collarbone, and you shudder. Experts continue to debate whether medieval labourers were truly as miserable as modern minds imagine. Some argue that community and purpose softened the grind, that shared struggle created bonds of survival. Others insist the exhaustion must have been crushing, shortening lives to a span that barely reached 40. As you wipe sweat from your brow, you suspect both views are true. The sun rises higher, pale and merciless. You squint against it and notice your breath slowing into rhythm with your work. The sound of tools striking earth forms a kind of music. Thud, scrape, sigh. A woman nearby hums a low tune, steady and slow, to pace her strokes. It is not joyful, but it keeps her moving. By midday, the heat presses down. You pause only long enough to swallow a mouthful of stale ale and a scrap of bread. The drink tastes sour, but it cuts through the dryness in your throat. You eat in silence, dust settling on your food like seasoning. The others do the same. Their faces turn toward the ground, as though speaking would waste precious breath. Records from the period describe how people measured time not by clocks but by the sun's path. The hours between dawn and dusk stretched differently depending on the season. Winter days were short but cold and hard. Summer days were endless, with light that burned more than it blessed. You imagine living a life without hours, ruled only by light and fatigue. In the distance, a blacksmith's hammer rings from the village. The sound travels like a heartbeat through the valley, rhythmic and strong. He too works without rest, shaping metal that will outlast him. Every ring of iron against iron feels like a reminder. This world belongs to those who endure. An interesting note from chroniclers mentions that some peasants celebrated Plough Monday, the first workday after Christmas, by dragging ploughs through the village and demanding ale from every house. Even exhaustion found its festivals. You picture laughter echoing through the muddy streets, the kind born from shared suffering and stubborn hope. The afternoon drifts by in slow exhaustion. The sky deepens into amber, and the air cools slightly. You straighten, stretching your spine until it pops. The field looks endless, but your part of it is done. The steward nods as he rides past, and though his approval means little, it still feels like permission to breathe. As evening falls, you return to the village. Smoke rises from chimneys, curling into the purple sky. Children chase each other through the dirt, their laughter quick and wild before they are called indoors to work again. A woman carries a basket of kindling on her back, shoulders bent, face expressionless. Inside your cottage, the fire glows low. You drop onto the wooden stool and feel every muscle protest. Your hands tremble as you hold a cup of broth. The warmth seeps slowly through your fingers, a small mercy. Outside, an owl calls, lonely and haunting. You think of your modern world 8-hour days, labor laws, ergonomic chairs, and realize how new the concept of rest truly is. No one fully agrees on when work became something separate from life, when people began to divide labor from identity. In this century, the line does not exist. To stop working is to risk hunger. To rest too long is to invite ruin. You finish your drink, lean back, and stare into the fire until your eyes blur. Sleep comes easily, not from comfort but from exhaustion. Your body shuts down like a tool returned to its shelf. Tomorrow will come early again, as it always does. In the silence before dreams, you whisper to yourself, almost in disbelief that people once survived like this every single day. The morning is quiet except for the faint crackle of the fire and the low hum of a cough that will not go away. You pull the blanket tighter around your shoulders. The air feels colder than before. But you know it is not just the weather. It is the sickness that drifts unseen through the damp cottages, a ghost made of air and breath. Records from the period tell us that most people lived with chronic illness. Coughs lasted for months, fevers returned like unwanted guests, and small injuries could become death sentences. The body was a battlefield, long before anyone understood infection. You touch your wrist, where a blister from the hoe has swollen. The skin around it is red, throbbing slightly. You wonder what a little antibiotic ointment could do, if only you had it. A curious detail from old manuscripts describes how healers believed sickness came from imbalanced humours: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. The cure was to restore balance, often through purging or bleeding. You hear a knock at the door and see a man carrying a small wooden box. He is the local barber surgeon, his hands stained dark from the work of yesterday. He smiles kindly enough, though his tools glint like tiny knives. He opens the box to reveal a curved blade, some leeches in a jar, and a linen cloth spotted with old stains. You swallow hard. He explains that your wound looks angry, and the best solution is to let it bleed. Before you can refuse, he ties a strip around your arm and pricks the skin. Blood wells up, warm and bright. He watches it closely, nodding as if the redness itself carries meaning. According to monastery records, this practice was common across Europe. Monks kept leeches in jars for use on the sick, believing they drained bad blood and restored divine balance. The strange part is that sometimes it actually worked at least enough to keep the myth alive for centuries. Researchers continue to disagree about whether medieval medicine was entirely superstition or if some herbal treatments had real value. Willow bark, for example, contained natural salicylic acid, the same ingredient used later to create aspirin. You remember reading that once, and the thought comforts you. Even in ignorance, people searched for healing. A woman enters next, carrying a bundle of herbs tied with string. She calls herself a midwife, though her duties stretch far beyond childbirth. She crushes the leaves between her fingers, releasing a sharp, earthy smell: rosemary, sage, and a touch of garlic. She sprinkles the mixture over your wound and murmurs a prayer. The scent fills the room, both bitter and soothing. An odd little belief persisted for centuries that sickness could flee from pleasant smells. People burned juniper or lavender in their homes, thinking the smoke would drive away the plague. You take a deep breath of the herbs and find that, for a moment, you do feel lighter. Outside, the bell from the church tower tolls. You count the rings too many. Another soul has gone to rest. The villagers cross themselves automatically. Death is never far, yet no one weeps loudly. It has become as ordinary as rain. According to old parish lists, the average lifespan here was shockingly short. Many died before reaching 35, though a few strong ones lived longer. Childbirth claimed women, disease claimed men, and famine took whoever remained. You think of your modern hospitals, the hum of machines, the bright lights of emergency rooms, and the quiet assurance that help is possible. Here, there is only endurance. A mother nearby rocks a child who burns with fever. She dips a cloth in cool water, presses it to his head, and hums a melody that trembles with fear. There is no medicine to stop the heat, only prayer and hope. The air inside the room thickens with the smell of sweat and herbs. You watch her face, pale and still. It is the face of someone who knows both love and loss too well. No one fully agrees on how much pain medieval people truly felt compared to us. Some historians think constant exposure made them stoic, their nerves dulled by daily hardship. Others say suffering cut even deeper in a world that had no relief. You cannot decide which feels more terrible. By afternoon, the barber surgeon packs up his tools and leaves. You pay him with a small loaf of bread, your only spare gift. He thanks you as though it were gold. Outside, a man calls for him again. Someone else has fallen from a ladder. Work does not wait for healing. You sit by the fire, your arm throbbing, the smell of blood still in the air. The midwife gives you a cup of broth infused with honey and thyme. It tastes strange, but the warmth spreads through you. You think of pharmacies and pills lined neatly in rows, of modern antiseptics and vaccines, and you feel a sudden surge of gratitude. Night comes quietly. The coughing continues in the next room, softer now, weaker. Someone whispers a prayer for Saint Roch, protector against disease. You close your eyes and listen to the crackle of the fire. The world outside is dark and full of danger, but for a few moments, the warmth of the herbs and the flicker of light make you believe that maybe, somehow, healing has always been more about faith than medicine. The sound of the church bell breaks the still morning air. Its tone carries across the hills, slow and steady, as if the entire world must pause to listen. You stand outside your cottage and look toward the tall stone tower. Mist curls around its base like a shroud. The bell does not call you personally, yet everyone in the village moves toward it as though pulled by an invisible rope. It is well recorded that religion ruled nearly every aspect of medieval life. From sunrise prayers to the final whisper before death, faith shaped thought, behavior, and even law. The church was not just a place of worship, but the beating heart of society. Without it, the rhythm of life would fall silent. You join the crowd walking toward the church, your breath visible in the cool morning air. A peculiar detail from surviving sermons reveals that people were encouraged to confess weekly, even daily if possible. Guilt was treated like a sickness, cured only through the priest's absolution. Inside the church, the air smells of wax and old wood. Candles flicker against the stone walls, casting tall shadows that sway like ghosts. You kneel, feeling the hard floor press against your knees. Around you, others whisper prayers in Latin they cannot understand. The sound resembles the wind moving through reeds, endless and low. Some researchers believe the power of the church filled a vacuum that science and state could not yet occupy. When you do not know why sickness spreads or crops fail, divine will seems the only explanation. A priest moves through the aisle, robes brushing the floor, eyes half closed in concentration. You bow your head as he passes, afraid to meet his gaze. In this world, faith is not just guidance, it is survival. According to parish accounts, attending Mass was mandatory for nearly everyone. Even the smallest absence could lead to punishment. The priest's word was law, and his blessing was a shield. Yet for all its holiness, corruption lingered in the corners. Some clergy lived in luxury, eating meat and drinking fine wine while preaching poverty to the hungry. Still, no one dared to challenge them openly. A curious tradition of the age involved selling indulgences, written promises of reduced punishment in the afterlife. You picture peasants trading their few coins for the hope of forgiveness, clutching the parchment like a ticket to heaven. You feel the ache of longing in that gesture, the human need to believe that suffering has purpose. Experts remain divided on whether faith brought comfort or control. Some argue it gave structure and hope to lives ruled by uncertainty. Others see it as a cage gilded with scripture. You listen to the priest's sermon now, words rising and falling in a language you cannot follow. His voice is calm but absolute, each phrase ending with the congregation's murmured, Amen. Outside, the churchyard smells faintly of damp grass and incense. You notice the graves scattered unevenly, some marked with crosses, others only stones. Death and faith live side by side here, inseparable companions. A group of children chase each other between the markers, laughter mixing with the toll of another distant bell. One forgotten practice that seems strange to modern ears was the blessing of tools and animals. Before ploughing or harvest, priests would sprinkle holy water on oxen and fields, asking God for fertility and protection. The people believed that divine favor could make the earth itself kinder. You imagine droplets falling on your own hands, cool and clean, and feel a pang of longing for such certainty. Inside the church again, you notice the artwork murals painted in faded reds and golds. Scenes of heaven and hell cover the walls. Angels trumpet from clouds while sinners burn below, their faces twisted in agony. Children stare at these images daily, growing up with terror painted into their understanding of the world. According to medieval chroniclers, such pictures were sermons for the illiterate, stories told through fear. No one fully agrees on how deeply people believed every image they saw. Some historians suggest that devotion was sincere, almost childlike. Others think many attended services out of obligation or fear rather than faith. You look at the painted flames and wonder which would have been worse, believing every threat or doubting them in silence. When the service ends, you step outside into a thin drizzle. The villagers disperse quietly, each returning to their tasks. The priest remains at the doorway, watching them go with the solemn patience of a man who holds both their souls and their secrets. You pass him and feel the weight of his gaze on your back. Later, in the tavern, talk turns to miracles. A traveller claims he saw the Virgin's face in a puddle near Canterbury. Another swears his cousin's blindness was cured by touching a relic. Whether true or not, the stories travel faster than reason ever could. You sip your drink, listening, and realize that hope is the one luxury no one here can live without. That night, before sleep, you hear the bells again. They toll for evening prayer, echoing across the valley like heartbeats of the divine. You lie still, eyes closed, and imagine the candles burning inside the church, their light trembling but unwavering. Faith here is not a choice. It is the air itself, thick, invisible, and always present, wrapping every life in the promise of salvation or the fear of its absence. The next morning dawns cold and grey. You hear the church bell again, but today it sounds heavier, slower, as though even the metal feels tired. You pull your cloak tight and step outside. The fields stretch into mist, and beyond them, the manor rises a dark shape on a low hill, its stone walls catching what little light there is. You are reminded that in this world, almost nothing truly belongs to you. It is well recorded in royal tax rolls and manorial ledgers that the feudal system ruled every breath of medieval life. Power flowed downward, like a river that never reversed course. At the top sat the king, beneath him the nobles and knights, and at the very bottom, the peasants who tilled the land but owned none of it. You are one of those peasants now, bound to the soil like a root that cannot pull itself free. A curious fact from early charters reveals that even your body could be considered property. A lord could grant or trade his serfs as easily as livestock. If he married off your daughter, it was not kindness but a transaction. The concept of freedom existed, but only for those born into it. You glance at the manor again and feel a strange chill that is not from the wind. You join a line of villagers walking toward the large courtyard. Today is collection day. The steward waits with a parchment and a look that dares no excuses. Each person steps forward, handing over sacks of grain, eggs, or a small portion of dried fish. These are rents owed not in coins but in survival. You clutch your own small offering and feel its weight like loss. According to records kept by monastic scribes, serfs worked 3 to 4 days each week on their lord's land without pay, in addition to tending their own fields. The arrangement was called corvée, and it was considered lawful and just. You step forward when called, place your goods on the table, and bow your head. The steward marks something on his scroll, then dismisses you with a nod. An interesting little detail often forgotten is that peasants sometimes owed strange payments called feudal incidents. You might have to give your best animal to the lord upon your death, or pay a fee to marry outside the estate. Even your joy and your grief were taxed. The absurdity of it would make you laugh if it were not your reality. Experts remain divided on whether peasants saw their lords as oppressors or as necessary guardians. Some chronicles describe loyalty and mutual respect, others rebellion and hatred. You sense both in yourself. Without the manor, there is protection from no one, but within its shadow, Your life feels smaller, pressed beneath invisible weight. You watch a boy carry water to the manor's gate, his bare feet caked in mud. The guards ignore him, laughing as they talk. The boy's eyes, however, glance upward, full of something fierce. You realize that resistance can live quietly, even under chains. A priest arrives to bless the Lord's household. He sprinkles holy water on the doorway, chanting softly. The Lord himself appears for a moment, draped in fur and polished boots that gleam in the pale light. His hands are soft, his cheeks pink with health. You try not to stare, but it is impossible not to compare his ease with your ache. According to surviving letters between nobles, many truly believed they were chosen by God to rule. Kings and lords saw hierarchy not as cruelty, but as divine order. As in heaven, so on earth, one duke wrote, explaining that obedience was the path to peace. You wonder what peace feels like when every day is labor. One curious story from the Chronicles of Flanders tells of a peasant who refused to bow before his lord and was made to crawl on his knees through the village as punishment. The crowd watched in silence, some weeping, others afraid to move. You imagine yourself in his place, dirt in your mouth, pride shattered, and realize that courage here comes with a price few can afford. By afternoon you return to the fields. The sky clears briefly, revealing a bright sun that glints off the manor's windows. You squint and think how strange it is that wealth can shine so far while hunger stays invisible. The wind smells of wet straw and smoke. You feel both small and eternal, like one of countless names written in faded ink in a record book somewhere. No one fully agrees on when the idea of human rights began. Some scholars trace its roots to rebellions like the Peasants' Revolt of 1381, when thousands demanded freedom and fair pay. Others argue it came centuries later, born of ink and reason, not pitchforks. Whatever the truth, you feel the faint stirrings of rebellion deep in your chest, an echo of the countless voices that once rose from fields just like this. The sun dips low, and you head home. Behind you, the manor stands silent, its tower outlined against the blood-red sky. Inside those walls are feasts, laughter, and warmth. Outside, smoke drifts from small cottages where tired hands prepare thin soup. The gap between rich and poor is not a line but an abyss, yet both sides breathe the same cold air. You step inside your home, setting down the empty basket. The fire crackles weakly. You sit and stare into the embers, thinking of all the invisible debts you carry. Land, loyalty, labor, none of it truly yours. Yet somehow, beneath the dirt and fatigue, there is still pride. You worked, you endured, and tomorrow you will rise again. In a world where freedom belongs only to those who command it, survival itself feels like quiet defiance. You wake in the dark before dawn, startled by footsteps just outside your door. For a moment you freeze, hand on your chest, listening. It is only your neighbor, heading to the well, but the sound reminds you that here, privacy does not exist. Every wall is thin, every sound shared. Even in sleep, you belong to the village. Records from manorial court documents reveal that most people in medieval towns and villages lived in one-room dwellings. Families, servants, and animals often shared the same space. The air inside such homes was thick with heat, breath, and smoke. You roll onto your side, and your shoulder brushes the person sleeping next to you. There is no boundary, not even in dreams. A small, curious fact often noted in household accounts is that animals sometimes served as night warmers. Chickens huddled under benches, pigs dozed by the hearth, and cats slept near bread dough to keep it warm. You hear a snuffling sound near your feet and feel something soft brush your leg. It is the family dog, turning in circles before settling down again. You step outside into the chill morning air. The street is already alive with sound. The creak of wooden shutters, the splash of water in buckets, the hum of early gossip. In this world, everyone knows everyone else's business. A secret is like smoke. It cannot be contained for long. According to village chronicles, even the most personal matters were often public. Marriages were announced at church, confessions heard in open halls, and punishments carried out in the square for all to witness. Reputation was currency, and rumor was law. You pass a group of women exchanging hushed whispers about a girl who spoke too freely to a visiting soldier. The glances that follow her could wound as deeply as any sword. Experts remain divided on how people understood privacy before modern times. Some believe they did not desire solitude the way we do, finding comfort instead in community. Others argue that even then, people yearned for moments alone but had nowhere to hide. You look around your small cottage and realize there are no doors to close, no space that belongs only to you. A curious habit of the time involved covering windows with oiled parchment instead of glass. It allowed light in but blurred the view. You notice this now, the morning sun turning the room golden and hazy. For a moment it feels almost peaceful, until you remember that your neighbors can hear every word through the wall. Inside, your host family begins to stir. A child cries. A man coughs. A woman scolds gently. Life unfolds in public. The smell of porridge fills the air, mingled with smoke and damp wool. You help stir the pot, your hands numb from cold. When someone laughs at a joke, the sound bursts bright and loud, then fades quickly. Joy here is brief, shared, and never secret. According to parish records, even intimacy between couples was governed by the church. Priests gave detailed instructions on when and how one could share a bed, marking certain days as forbidden for reasons of holiness. The concept of privacy in love simply did not exist. The body, like the soul, was under supervision. You glance at the couple across the room, their quiet glances of affection careful, almost shy. One small but telling detail noted by travelers is that even nobles lacked privacy by modern standards. A king might sleep surrounded by servants, attendants, and guards, all within a few steps of his bed. Curtains offered illusion, not isolation. In letters from the time, lords complained about noise, smells, and constant presence, yet few dared imagine solitude as something desirable. You step outside again to fetch wood. The streets are muddy, lined with thatched roofs that lean toward one another like tired shoulders. Laundry hangs between houses, fluttering in the weak wind. You can hear conversations from inside arguments, songs, prayers all blending into one long hum of human sound. Researchers continue to disagree about whether medieval people ever experienced loneliness in the way modern minds understand it. Perhaps in a world of constant closeness, solitude would have felt more like punishment than peace. You pause by the well, watching the reflection of the sky ripple on the water. It is the only moment of quiet you have had all day. In the afternoon, a small commotion breaks out in the square. A man has been accused of stealing bread from the baker. The entire village gathers before the magistrate. There are no locked rooms, no private hearings. Judgment is spectacle, not secret. The man pleads his case, but the crowd murmurs loudly. In this place, reputation decides guilt before evidence ever can. An intriguing note from old court rolls mentions that even confessions of crime were considered communal property. The written words were read aloud, copied, and passed around. Sin was never silent. You wonder what it would feel like to live under eyes that never looked away. Evening falls at last, and smoke rises from every chimney. The village smells of cooked grain and damp wood. Inside the cottage you sit by the fire, surrounded by the slow breathing of others. Shadows stretch across the walls, soft and long. You close your eyes and imagine silence the real kind, where no footsteps echo, no whisper leaks through the wall, no bell tolls in the distance. But here silence is impossible. Even the night has a pulse. The low murmur of voices, the rustle of hay, the restless shuffle of life live together. You realize that privacy, like clean water or comfort, is a luxury not yet invented. You breathe in deeply, accept the noise as part of existence, and let the hum of the world carry you into uneasy sleep. The sky feels bruised with color when you wake, streaks of violet and gold pressing against the edges of morning. The air is still, too still. You hear no birds, no carts, no laughter. Then a sound breaks the quiet. A single bell, tolling slowly from the church tower. You have heard it before, but today it rings differently. This is not a call to prayer. It is a warning. Records from the late 14th century describe how towns fell silent just before the plague arrived. First came whispers of a fever somewhere distant, then a merchant who failed to return, then a child with dark spots along the neck. You feel the weight of those stories settle into your chest. The villagers move quickly, shuttering windows, covering their faces with scarves soaked in vinegar. A curious detail preserved in medical tracts of the time is that people believed foul air, or miasma, carried disease. They burned herbs, sweet wood, and even animal dung to chase away the poison. You smell it now, the acrid smoke curling through the lanes, clinging to everything it touches. The air feels thick and sour, yet no one dares breathe deeply. You step outside and see a woman kneeling beside a well, her shoulders shaking. A small bundle lies at her feet, wrapped tightly in cloth. She whispers prayers you cannot hear. According to parish death rolls, entire families vanished within days. Priests struggled to keep up with burials, and graveyards filled faster than they could be dug. Some towns banned funerals altogether, fearing the living might join the dead too soon. Experts continue to debate what truly spread the Black Death so swiftly. Some say fleas on rats were the carriers. Others suggest it moved through the air, leaping from person to person like fire through dry grass. Whatever the truth, you can feel the fear of it pressing against your skin, an invisible hand tracing the outline of your body. A strange little belief circulated that carrying flowers or holding pleasant scents could ward off sickness. People stuffed pockets with herbs or wore garlands of lavender. You see a child holding a small posy, eyes wide, nose buried in the petals. Her mother pulls her away as someone nearby begins to cough. Inside the church, candles burn low. The priest speaks hoarsely, his voice cracking. He urges everyone to repent, to confess before it is too late. The smell of incense mingles with fear. You kneel, the stone floor cold beneath you, and feel the air shudder each time the bell tolls again. According to written accounts from Genoa to London, the plague moved faster than reason could follow. Ships brought it to ports, and from there it crawled inland, devouring cities and villages alike. You picture those ships rocking on black water, their holds full of grain and death. No one fully agrees on how people found the strength to keep living amid so much loss. Some turned inward, clinging to prayer. Others indulged in reckless joy, feasting and singing until the world ended around them. A few blamed strangers, travelers, or anyone different, spreading cruelty faster than the sickness itself. You watch the villagers eye a passing merchant with suspicion, as though he alone carries the end of the world in his cloak. By afternoon, the streets are nearly empty. The air hums with absence. You pass the baker's house and see the door nailed shut with a cross of red paint. The smell of bread still lingers faintly, mixed with the bitterness of ashes. Someone coughs nearby, and you step back instinctively, heart pounding. A surviving diary from the period describes how fear became its own contagion. People stopped helping the sick, avoided even their own families. Some fled to the countryside, hoping distance would save them. You imagine the loneliness of those who stayed behind, watching the smoke rise from chimneys that would never burn again. Evening comes early. The sky darkens quickly, as if it too is afraid. You sit by the hearth, clutching a small pouch of herbs tied around your neck. The smell is sharp and grassy, almost pleasant, a tiny illusion of safety. Outside the bell tolls again, slower this time, You count 7 rings. Someone else is gone. An account from a Florentine monk tells of how entire communities vanished, leaving only silence and the faint smell of smoke. He wrote that even the birds stopped singing, as though the world itself mourned. You listen now, and he was right. The quiet feels alive, breathing softly at the edges of every sound. You close your eyes, trying to remember the noise of laughter, the clatter of work, the hum of life before fear took it. It feels distant, like another century. You think of medicine, vaccines, clean hospitals filled with light and noise, and realize how fragile the line between safety and despair truly is. The fire in the hearth flickers low. You wrap your cloak tighter and whisper a small prayer, though you are not sure to whom. Outside, the bell tolls once more, deep and hollow, carrying across the fields until it fades into nothing. The night settles around you, heavy and still. The world holds its breath. The morning sky is pale and cold, like steel dipped in mist. You wake to the sound of footsteps outside, heavy and deliberate. When you open the door, 2 men in rough wool stand in the lane, each carrying a wooden staff marked with the symbol of the crown. Behind them, a small crowd gathers, drawn by the promise of spectacle. You feel it before you understand it. Something is about to be judged. It is well documented in medieval court rolls that justice in this age was swift, public, and often cruel. There were few prisons and fewer appeals. Guilt was something decided by God, not evidence. Trials by ordeal were common, holding red-hot iron, plunging hands into boiling water, or being thrown into a river to see if you would sink or float. You shudder at the thought, realizing mercy is as rare here as comfort. A curious detail preserved in parish accounts tells that villagers sometimes treated executions as festivals. Families would bring food, children climbed fences for a better view, and merchants sold wine near the gallows. Punishment and entertainment blurred until they were one. You can hear laughter now at the edge of the crowd. The accused is dragged forward, his hands bound. His face is pale but calm, as if he knows the ritual better than the words of his own prayer. According to the surviving proclamations of royal courts, crimes like theft, poaching, or even gossip against authority could end a life. You glance around at the faces beside you, farmers, women, a priest, all watching in silence. The executioner stands ready, his axe gleaming in the weak sun. He is not hated here. He is part of the order that holds the world together. Some scholars argue that these brutal displays were not only punishment but education. They reminded the crowd of what awaited anyone who stepped out of line. Others believe they reflected fear rather than faith in justice, a society so fragile that it needed violence to feel safe. You cannot decide which feels more terrible as the drum begins to beat, low and steady. An odd little fact buried in an old chronicle says that before certain executions, condemned men were offered ale to steady their nerves. You see it now. A small cup passed to the prisoner. He drinks slowly, his hands trembling. The priest murmurs a blessing. The crowd murmurs approval, and for a brief moment, the air holds its breath. The blow falls quickly. A few people gasp. Others cheer. The sound is both final and strangely hollow. You turn away, your stomach twisting. Children laugh nearby, throwing pebbles at a crow. Life resumes almost immediately, as though nothing sacred has happened. According to written accounts from traveling clerks, many who witnessed executions described a mix of horror and fascination. Some felt guilt, others felt vindicated. The ritual satisfied something dark yet familiar, the human need to see order restored through visible suffering. You feel it too, a strange pull between revulsion and understanding. Experts remain divided on whether medieval people truly believed in justice or simply accepted it as divine will. In a world ruled by hierarchy, fairness was not an expectation but a privilege. You imagine trying to explain juries, rights, or appeals to these people. They would laugh or stare in disbelief. Justice is whatever the powerful declare. Later that day, The same men who carried out the sentence are seen drinking together at the tavern. Their laughter is rough, but not cruel. Work is work. You overhear one say that a hanging is easier than a beheading, it requires less cleaning afterward. You leave quickly, the words clinging to your mind. A curious punishment known as the pillory was used for lesser crimes. Offenders were locked by the neck and wrists in a wooden frame, left for hours as townsfolk jeered and threw food or stones. You pass the village square and see the device leaning against the wall, its wood worn smooth from use. A stray dog sniffs at its base, tail wagging. No one fully agrees on whether the crowd's cruelty came from ignorance or simple survival instinct. When every day demands obedience, watching someone punished might feel like reassurance you are still safe, still within the rules. You think about how easy it is to mistake fear for morality. Evening falls slowly. The sky deepens to red, the same color as the stains left in the dirt outside the square. The air feels thick, heavy with smoke and silence. Inside your cottage, you light a candle and stare into the flame. The image of the man's face returns, calm even in death. Perhaps he knew something you do, not that mercy, in this world, is not found in law but in memory. You close your eyes and listen to the faint hum of voices outside, people discussing the event over their dinners. Tomorrow they will talk about it less, and by next week they will have forgotten. Justice here is quick, but forgetting is even quicker. The candle flickers once, then steadies, and you let the light guide you into uneasy sleep, where judgment no longer has a voice. The morning smells of bread and smoke, the kind of scent that almost feels kind until you realize it hides the absence of sweetness. You watch as a young couple walks past your door, the woman's veil thin as spider silk, her husband's boots too large for his feet. They look solemn, not joyful. You soon learn it is their wedding day. According to parish registers and family charters, marriage in the Middle Ages was rarely about love. It was an agreement between families, a contract sealed by necessity more than desire. For nobles, it meant alliances and inheritance. For peasants, it meant survival. You follow the couple to the small stone church where the priest waits, holding a book and a look of weary patience. A curious detail preserved in early wedding rituals is that vows could be made almost anywhere: a field, a doorway, even a tavern, so long as witnesses were present. Only later did the church demand formal ceremonies. Today, however, this pair chooses the altar. They stand close, but not touching, eyes lowered. The priest speaks in Latin, his voice echoing against cold stone. The words sound holy but also binding, like chains made of air. Experts continue to debate how much personal choice medieval people had in marriage. Some evidence shows that families arranged unions for property or labor, while others suggest that affection sometimes found its way in anyway. You watch the bride glance up at her husband just once and see a flicker of tenderness before duty swallows it whole. An odd little custom mentioned in folk accounts describes the bedding ceremony after weddings. The newlyweds were led to their bed by friends and family, who sometimes stayed long enough to witness the first kiss or even the removal of shoes as proof of union. You imagine the embarrassment, the forced laughter, and the absence of privacy that never ends. According to legal writings of the time, the concept of consent was complex. Husbands were expected to provide and protect, wives to obey and bear children. Failure in either role could bring shame or punishment. You hear an older woman murmur that a wife's silence is a blessing to her household. The words fall heavily, like stones. Researchers disagree about whether love truly mattered in medieval unions. Some songs from the period speak of passion, secret meetings, and impossible longing. But the same age that wrote poetry about devotion also treated marriage as an economic tool. You suspect people learned to find affection after the vows, not before them. Later, during the small feast, you sit near the edge of the table. The food is simple stewed cabbage, bread, a bit of ale, but the laughter is real. Children chase each other, and someone begins to sing a soft ballad about a shepherd and his lost love. For a brief moment, the room feels alive with warmth. Perhaps this is what passes for romance here, small kindnesses woven through hardship. A curious superstition from this period claimed that eating an egg together would ensure fertility. The bride cracks one open, smiling shyly as her husband tastes it. The crowd cheers. Beneath the noise, you can see the quiet tremor in their hands. They are nervous, not from love, but from the weight of expectation. By nightfall, the celebration fades. The fire burns low. The guests depart, whispering good wishes and prayers for healthy sons. The couple remains, seated beside the hearth. They do not speak for a while. The woman traces the rim of her cup. The man stares into the flames. You sense that they are both imagining the same uncertain future. According to monastic chronicles, widows often remarried quickly, sometimes within months. Marriage was less about companionship than about the structure it provided a safeguard against hunger, loneliness, or scandal. You think of your own world, where love can be chosen, left, or reinvented, and feel both envy and sorrow for these two. An odd fact noted by one traveller says that on feast days, villagers played a game where unmarried men and women paired off by drawing lots, pretending to be couples for a week. Some of those pretend unions became real. Even in a world ruled by duty, desire found small cracks to slip through. No one fully agrees on how women felt about marriage in these centuries. Some found quiet happiness, others despair. Letters that survive tell stories of devotion, cruelty, and endurance. You think of the bride's soft smile earlier, how fleeting it seemed, and wonder which story will become hers. As the night deepens, you hear the sound of rain on the roof, steady and slow. The couple lies down together in the same bed they will share for the rest of their lives. The firelight flickers across their faces, and for a moment, they look like two people suspended between fear and hope. You turn away, giving them the privacy this world rarely allows, and step outside into the damp air. The rain smells of soil and wood. You walk back toward your cottage, feeling the chill seep into your clothes. Behind you, the laughter from the wedding fades completely, replaced by silence. Marriage here is not a promise of happiness. It is a joining of fates, a shared endurance against the world's endless weight. You whisper a quiet wish for them, and for all who must learn, love not through choice, but through survival. The roosters have not yet begun their noise when you wake to a faint cry. At first you think it must be the wind, but then you hear it again, thin, desperate, human. You step outside into the grey light of early morning and see a woman hurrying across the muddy lane, her arms wrapped around something small. She disappears into a nearby cottage, the door closing behind her with a dull thud. You already know what it means. Another child is being born. According to records kept by monastic infirmaries, childbirth in the Middle Ages was one of the most dangerous moments in a woman's life. There were no trained doctors in villages, only midwives, prayers, and luck. Half the children might not live past their 5th year, and their mothers risked death with every birth. You stand outside for a while, listening to the muffled shouts and whispers that drift through the wooden walls. A curious detail from midwifery notes of the time describes how women placed iron knives or crosses near the bed to keep away spirits thought to steal infants. The air inside would grow thick with smoke from burning herbs meant to drive off evil. You imagine that smell now sharp, bitter, and full of hope. Experts continue to disagree about how much medical skill midwives truly had. Some claim they were guided mostly by superstition, while others argue they held generations of practical knowledge about the body. You watch the door open briefly as someone runs for more water. For an instant you glimpse the scene inside. The woman sweating, the midwife kneeling, the fire glowing low. There is pain, but also purpose. According to parish baptismal rolls, babies were often christened within a day of birth. Death came so quickly that waiting was dangerous for the soul. You hear the church bell ring a few hours later, signaling not death this time, but life. The baby has survived, at least for now. The villagers smile faintly, relief mingled with fear. Every birth feels like a fragile victory against the world. A strange little custom found in village traditions was the churching of women after childbirth. Once recovered, the mother would attend a brief ceremony to be purified before rejoining community life. The belief was that birth left her spiritually unclean, though it also marked her as strong. You think of the contradiction in that, revered for giving life, shunned for the same reason. By afternoon, the mother sits upright near the hearth, the baby wrapped in a blanket that smells of smoke and milk. She looks older already, her eyes distant and tired. You remember reading that medieval women were often mothers by 16 and grandmothers before 30. Childhood vanished almost as soon as it began. One odd fact found in old accounts is that even small children worked as soon as they could walk steadily. You see this truth as you watch a boy of perhaps 5 guiding a goat toward pasture, his feet bare and caked with mud. He whistles softly, his face solemn with duty. Play is a luxury he cannot afford. Researchers continue to disagree on whether medieval children were treated with affection or viewed only as labor. Paintings show both tenderness and indifference. Perhaps love existed quietly, unspoken, behind tired eyes and rough hands. You see a woman brushing a girl's hair near the doorway, her fingers gentle, her voice soft. The moment lasts only a few heartbeats, but it is real. According to monastic school records, education was rare outside the church. Most children learned only what work demanded: planting, weaving, carrying, serving. Those lucky enough to study Latin or letters were usually boys destined for priesthood. For everyone else, the world itself was the classroom, and hunger the first lesson. A curious superstition from peasant households held that if a child laughed in sleep, angels were playing nearby. You notice one toddler lying on a pallet, smiling faintly as she dreams. The sight feels like sunlight breaking through clouds. In a place filled with hardship, small joys shine all the brighter. Evening comes, and you sit near the mother again. The baby stirs and begins to cry, a thin, strong sound that cuts through the quiet. She rocks him slowly, whispering something you cannot hear. The midwife has gone home, her work done until the next knock at her door. The smell of boiled herbs lingers in the air, mingling with smoke. No one fully agrees on how much hope people carried for their children in times like this. Some historians believe they loved fiercely despite the risk of loss, while others argue they hardened their hearts for survival. You watch the mother kiss the baby's forehead, and you know the answer does not matter. Love always arrives, even when it should not. Outside, the sky fades to violet. The village quiets except for the occasional cough, the bark of a dog, the creak of a door in the wind. You stand for a moment, looking toward the stars. Life here is short, often cruel, but it continues in spite of everything. You think of the newborn inside, tiny lungs pulling air for the first time, and feel a strange ache of gratitude. The cry of that child reminds you that survival is its own kind of triumph. In a world that offers little mercy, every breath taken is an act of defiance. You walk back to your cottage as the night settles around the village, carrying the faint sound of life through the cold air like a fragile flame. The first light of dawn creeps through a veil of mist. You open your eyes and see your breath in the air, white and soft like smoke. The room is silent except for the slow breathing of those still asleep beside you. The fire has gone out. The cold presses close, a quiet reminder that home ends where the walls do. You rise and step outside. The fields are wet with dew, and the dirt road glistens faintly. A man passes, leading a donkey laden with baskets. He nods at you and keeps walking. He is leaving the village, a brave act few attempt. The unknown waits just beyond the horizon, and in this age, the horizon is a dangerous place. According to the journals of medieval travelers, the open road was filled with both wonder and peril. Bandits haunted forest paths, wild dogs hunted the edges of towns, and every stranger might carry sickness or deception. Yet still, people walked pilgrims seeking shrines, merchants carrying wool or salt, soldiers chasing pay. To travel was to gamble with fate. A curious fact from royal decrees records that peasants often needed permission to leave their lord's land. Without it, they could be punished or even branded as deserters. You imagine showing a piece of parchment to every guard post, proving your right to wander. Freedom was never free here. You decide to follow the road for a while, just to see what lies beyond the next hill. The air smells of pine and damp leaves. The forest ahead looks inviting from afar, but as you enter, the light dims. The path narrows. The sound of birds fades. The silence feels thick, alive with unseen eyes. An old chronicler once wrote that travelers feared the woods more than wolves. In the dark, they said, spirits walked beside the living, whispering from the trees. You hear a twig snap and turn quickly. Nothing moves. Still, you quicken your pace. Experts continue to debate how much of these fears were superstition and how much was experience. Some scholars argue that banditry was rare and exaggerated, while others describe entire regions ruled by thieves. You think of both possibilities as you spot an abandoned cart half buried in mud. The wheels are broken. The basket's empty. You do not stay long. A small detail in merchants' ledgers tells of how travelers carried charms against misfortune: a piece of iron, a prayer carved into wood, a scrap of saint's cloth. You touch the pouch around your neck and realize you have begun to believe in its protection. Faith, you discover, grows stronger the farther you walk from safety. By midday, the forest opens to a meadow. You see smoke curling from a small hut in the distance. A tinker sits outside, repairing a pot. He greets you with cautious kindness and offers a seat by his fire. The smell of metal and cooked grain fills the air. You share a piece of bread, and he tells you stories of the road of cities where towers touch the clouds, of seas wider than kingdoms. You know he exaggerates, but the music of his words warms you. According to a letter written by a Benedictine monk, wandering tradesmen and storytellers were often the only link between distant villages. They carried gossip, songs, and news of the world beyond. You realize that in an age without books for the common folk, stories were the arteries through which life and imagination flowed. The tinker's wife offers you water from a wooden cup. It tastes faintly of ash but feels cool and clean. She wears a red ribbon around her wrist, faded but bright enough to catch your eye. A curious belief of the time held that red cloth protected travelers from evil spirits. You thank her quietly, noting how superstition and kindness intertwine until they become the same thing. Afternoon stretches long, the sky turns golden, and the air hums with the sound of insects. You part ways with the tinker, offering a small nod of gratitude. He waves once, already bent again over his work. The road ahead curves gently through rolling hills. You walk in silence, feeling the weight of distance grow lighter with each step. A manuscript written by a French abbot describes how pilgrims marked their journeys by songs. Some sang hymns for protection, others for rhythm. You hum softly, unsure of the tune, but the sound comforts you. Your voice blends with the rustle of grass, the sigh of wind through trees. As evening falls, you reach a wayside inn, a rough building of timber and thatch. Inside, the air smells of smoke, ale, and sweat. Travelers crowd the benches, their laughter loud but wary. You share a bowl of stew with a stranger who claims to have seen the sea. His eyes are bright, his hands scarred. Whether his tale is truth or dream, you do not ask. No one fully agrees on what the medieval traveller sought most: profit, salvation, or escape. Perhaps all three. The road, for all its danger, offered something the village never could: a taste of freedom, even if fleeting. You sip the last of your ale, staring into the fire. The flickering light paints the faces around you with gold and shadow. Everyone here is passing through, everyone chasing something unnamed. When you finally lie down on the straw bed in the corner, the sounds of the inn blend into a low murmur. A dog sighs near the hearth, and someone sings a tune too soft to follow. You close your eyes and think of how far you have walked, how far there still is to go. Outside, The road waits, endless and uncertain, like a promise whispered just beyond the reach of dawn. The road leads you to the gates of a city, its outline hazy in the morning mist. You stand still for a moment, taking in the smell before the sight. Smoke, tallow, and sewage mingle with the faint sweetness of baking bread. The walls rise high, scarred by time and rain. Above them, spires pierce the grey sky. The sound of bells and distant shouting fills the air. You step forward, heart quickening. It is well recorded in civic chronicles that medieval cities were worlds unto themselves, crowded, noisy, and alive in every possible way. They were centres of trade, ambition, and filth. You pass through the gates, paying a small toll to a guard whose armour looks more rust than metal. Inside, the streets are narrow and twisting, lined with wooden houses that lean toward each other like gossiping neighbours. A curious detail from city ordinances of the period states that people threw their garbage directly into the street. The result was a living carpet of refuse underfoot. You see it now. Vegetable scraps, straw, and worse, crushed into the mud by cartwheels. A rat scurries past, fat and bold. You step aside quickly as a bucket of waste splashes from a window above. Someone shouts an apology that does not sound sincere. According to records from London and Paris, the population density in large cities was immense. Thousands of people packed into cramped quarters, sharing air thick with smoke and sweat. The smell hits you harder than the noise. Fishmongers shout beside butchers, bakers hawk loaves still steaming from the oven, and somewhere nearby a man tunes a lute. The city feels alive in a way that borders on madness. Researchers remain divided on whether people grew used to such filth or simply endured it. Some argue that the constant stench dulled the senses. Others claim that residents fought it with perfumes, herbs, and smoke. Pass a shop where a woman sells small bundles of dried lavender. The scent feels like a blessing, sharp and clean. You buy one, holding it close to your nose as you walk. An odd little note from a Venetian merchant's diary tells of how pigs once roamed freely through city streets, cleaning up waste but creating chaos in the process. You spot one now, snorting happily as it roots near a pile of cabbage leaves. Children chase it, laughing, until a man throws a stick and curses. The laughter fades quickly. Survival leaves little room for play. You stop by a tavern with a faded sign swinging in the wind. Inside, the air is thick with smoke and talk. Men argue about grain prices. Someone sings a half-forgotten song, and a girl carries mugs of ale with practiced balance. The warmth feels welcome, the noise almost comforting. Cities, despite their stench, promise one thing villages never can: the illusion of anonymity. According to guild records, urban life offered opportunity for those willing to work or cheat. Craftsmen, merchants, and apprentices carved small freedoms from the chaos. You watch a cobbler outside, hammering nails into a shoe with quick, sure movements. His hands are blackened with soot, but his smile is genuine. He owns his tools. In this age, that is a kind of wealth. A curious superstition among city folk held that whistling indoors invited the devil. You notice how everyone hums or sings softly instead, as though even joy must be careful. It gives the streets a strange rhythm, like a song played under breath. By midday, you reach the marketplace. The air hums with energy. Stalls overflow with wool, spices, clay pots, and salted fish. The smell of roasting meat mingles with the tang of tanneries nearby. You hear 5 languages in as many minutes: French, Flemish, Latin, and others you cannot place. Cities were crossroads of the world, places where faiths, goods, and diseases travelled together. Experts still discuss whether such urban growth improved life or merely shifted misery behind walls. Some believe the mingling of ideas laid the groundwork for the future. Others say cities were traps, filled with smoke and despair. You can sense both truths in the faces passing by, hungry eyes and hopeful ones side by side. An odd historical note records that some streets were named for their odours: Fish Street, Flesh Lane, Gutter Row. You pass through one that lives up to its name. The air is heavy with brine and decay. Yet just beyond, a church rises, its spire catching a glimmer of sunlight. It feels like beauty and rot sharing the same breath. As the sun lowers, you climb a small hill overlooking the rooftops. The view takes your breath away. The city glows gold for a moment, smoke curling from chimneys like threads of light. It is filthy, noisy, crowded, and yet alive in a way that feels almost holy. You imagine how it must look to a peasant seeing it for the first time, a miracle made of stone and suffering. No one fully agrees on whether medieval cities were prisons or gateways. For some, they were traps of poverty. For others, they were ladders to freedom. You take one last look as the bells begin to ring again, echoing across the rooftops like a heartbeat. The sound fills the air, and for the first time in days, you realize you are smiling. The city is ugly, but it is human, and in its chaos, you feel a strange kind of belonging. As night falls, you make your way back toward the inn. The streets shimmer with torchlight, and the air hums with songs, laughter, and the shuffle of tired feet. You step through the doorway, the noise wrapping around you like a blanket. For tonight, you are just another soul in the crowd, another flicker of life in the great, untidy heart of the Middle Ages. The air changes the moment you wake. It carries a tension you can taste, a metallic scent that prickles in your nose. Outside, the city feels hushed, the streets half empty, the usual noise replaced by the distant rhythm of marching feet. You follow the sound, drawn by curiosity and dread. It is well documented in royal annals that war was a constant presence in medieval life. Kings fought over borders, lords quarreled for pride, and soldiers sold loyalty to whoever could pay. Few wars were glorious. Most were survival wrapped in banners. You walk toward the square where men gather beneath the colours of their lord, some holding spears, others little more than farming tools. A curious detail noted by chroniclers tells how many soldiers marched barefoot, their soles toughened from years in the fields. Boots were costly, armour rarer still. You see a boy no older than 16 clutching a pike taller than himself, his face pale but eager. His mother stands nearby, clutching a rosary, whispering a prayer too softly for him to hear. According to military payrolls, most fighters were not knights, but common labourers promised coin or forgiveness for crimes. You overhear one man laughing that he joined because the army at least fed him twice a day. His laughter fades when a captain walks by, inspecting their ranks. Researchers continue to debate whether medieval warfare was as brutal as legend describes or even worse. Some argue that chivalry softened combat, others that it existed only in songs. You sense the truth leans toward the latter. The captain's armour gleams, polished by others' hands, while his soldiers wear patched cloth and fear. A strange little superstition spread among men of the sword. They believed carrying a feather from a crow would keep death at bay. You spot several tucked behind belts or inside helmets. The soldiers smile nervously, pretending to believe their own luck. By noon, the army begins to march. The sound is thunderous, boots striking earth in uneven rhythm. You follow at a distance, feeling the vibration through your soles. The road narrows into open fields, the grass crushed flat where carts have passed before. Smoke rises on the horizon, too black for cooking fires. According to eyewitness accounts of battle, the noise was overwhelming, shouts, clashing steel, the screams of men and animals. You can almost hear it already. The first arrows fly before you see the enemy. They hiss through the air like angry insects. One strikes the ground near your feet, quivering. You freeze. The smell of sweat, smoke, and iron fills the air. An old journal written by a knight describes how battlefields smelled of blood and mud, a scent that lingered for days. You believe him now. As the lines clash, the air becomes thick with dust. The sound of metal striking metal echoes endlessly. Men fall. Others stumble over them, too afraid to stop. You see faces twisted with fear, not hate. Some scholars argue that medieval warfare was less about killing and more about endurance, holding a line. surviving the day. You watch a group of soldiers retreat, dragging a wounded friend. His leg is bent at an impossible angle, and he is screaming for water. No one has any to give. A curious fact preserved in the writings of clerics is that priests often walked behind armies carrying relics and crosses. They blessed men before the fight and prayed over the dead afterward. You glimpse one now, his robe torn, clutching a wooden cross as he stumbles over the fallen. The light catches on his beads, and for a heartbeat, you see how small faith looks beside so much chaos. By sunset, the field is quiet again. Smoke drifts low over the ground. The cries have faded into soft moans. You step carefully among the bodies, the earth slick beneath your feet. The air hums with flies. Somewhere nearby, a crow caws sharply, a sound that feels too alive for this place. According to later chronicles, looters followed every battle, stripping armor, jewelry, even boots from the dead. You see them already, moving through the field like shadows, working quickly before the captain's return. One bends to pull a ring from a hand that still looks warm. You turn away, your stomach tightening. No one fully agrees on whether knights truly followed codes of honor. Some manuscripts praise their valor, others describe their cruelty. You remember the boy with the pike, his mother whispering prayers. You do not see him among the living. Perhaps honor is simply what people say afterward to make horror sound noble. Night falls slowly, the sky painted in streaks of red and grey. Fires burn in the distance where the wounded are being tended or perhaps finished. You sit on a stone, exhausted though you have not fought. The silence feels heavier than noise ever did. An odd custom recorded by travellers describes how soldiers sometimes sang to the dead, low and tuneless, believing it helped their souls find rest. You hear it now, a broken melody, carried by tired voices. The song drifts through the air, fragile but human. You close your eyes and breathe in the scent of smoke and soil. The ground beneath you feels warm still, as if it remembers the struggle. You think of your own time, of distant wars fought with buttons and machines, and realize that death has not changed, only the tools. You stand, whispering a small, silent goodbye to the field. Then you turn back toward the faint lights of the city, where life, somehow, still continues. The morning sun hides behind a curtain of thin clouds, its light cold and colorless. You wake to the distant sound of a spinning wheel turning rhythmically, a soft hum carried on the wind. Following the sound, you find a woman sitting outside her cottage, her hands quick and sure as she twists wool into thread. She does not look up when you approach. She is working, and in this world, work is everything. According to household records and guild charters, most women in the Middle Ages labored from dawn until night without pause. Their hands made the cloth, baked the bread, tended the gardens, raised the children, and buried the dead. Their work built the world quietly, unnoticed except when it was missing. You watch her feet move the treadle while her fingers guide the thread with perfect rhythm, like a song without sound. A curious note in a merchant's ledger mentions that many women worked side by side with men in trades, though often for half the pay. Brewers, spinners, midwives, weavers, and herbalists filled the towns and villages, their skills sustaining every household. Yet their names rarely appear in records. History remembers kings, not the hands that clothed them. Experts remain divided on how much freedom women truly possessed. Some argue that widows and merchants' wives held power through trade and property. Others insist that most lived under strict obedience to fathers, husbands, and priests. You sense both truths in the woman before you, her quiet confidence balanced by the weight of expectation pressing invisibly around her. An odd little belief from folk tradition said that women who worked too late by candlelight risked drawing the attention of restless spirits. You glance at her window and notice several dried herbs hanging there, probably meant to ward off bad luck. She smiles faintly when she sees you looking. "Old habits," she says, her voice soft but steady. According to church writings, obedience was praised as a woman's highest virtue. Sermons warned against vanity, curiosity, or speech that carried too much wit. Yet the letters of noble women tell another story of bold opinions, sharp minds, and carefully hidden influence. You imagine how much was said in whispers, how much of history was written by hands pretending not to write at all. Later that day, you follow her to the market. The path winds past fields where women bend low, harvesting turnips, their skirts heavy with mud. A baby cries somewhere nearby, tied to a post while its mother works. The sound pierces the air, sharp and raw. No one stops. There is no one who can. A fascinating record from a London court describes how women sometimes ran alehouses, hosting travellers and locals alike. These spaces became the heartbeat of community, places where news spread faster than sermons. You pass one now, its doorway dark and warm. Inside, two women pour ale, while men argue about taxes. One laughs, her eyes bright despite the smoke. You realize that in small corners, power still lives. A peculiar superstition tells that a woman who could read or heal too well might be branded a witch. You remember the midwife from before, her steady hands and sharp gaze, and wonder how many like her were accused simply for knowing too much. You see a group of children drawing symbols in the dirt, pretending to cast spells. Their laughter is carefree, but beneath it, the echo of fear lingers. Some scholars suggest that medieval women created their own kind of freedom through endurance. By weaving, cooking, teaching, and healing, they shaped the world from its foundation. Others argue they were prisoners of a system that stole their voices. You think of the spinner, her fingers never still, her eyes focused ahead. Perhaps both views are true. Survival itself can be a quiet rebellion. As evening falls, you return to the cottage. The woman's children sit by the fire, their faces glowing in the light. She hums softly while mending a shirt, the same tune you heard earlier in the day. Her husband enters, tired but smiling. He sits beside her, and they share a small bowl of stew. There is tenderness in the gesture, ordinary and fragile. A curious detail from personal letters between spouses reveals that affection did exist, though rarely written. Men called their wives "my good companion" or "my heart's rest." Such words were not poetry, but survival. You see that truth here in the way her hand lingers on his arm as she passes him bread. No one fully agrees on whether medieval women were content with their lives or quietly dreaming of another. Some found peace in routine, others in faith, a few in secret acts of courage. You watch her glance toward the window, her eyes thoughtful, as if the world outside is calling her by name. Then she looks back at her family and smiles. The firelight flickers across her face, softening the lines carved by labor and time. You realize that history often overlooks such moments, too gentle to leave in ink. Yet here, in this quiet room, the entire story of endurance is being written without words. You sit still, letting the rhythm of her spinning wheel echo in your mind, a heartbeat of persistence in a world that never stops demanding. The morning light slants through the smoke of burned incense, drifting over the rooftops like breath from a sleeping god. You hear the church bells before you see the church itself, their tones slow and solemn. The air tastes faintly of ash and damp stone. Every sound seems to lead your feet toward the steeple that rises above the village, pulling you once more into the heart of faith. It is well recorded in the writings of chroniclers that religion shaped not only the soul, but the rhythm of every hour. The day was divided by bells, prime at sunrise, vespers at dusk, compline before sleep. Each sound reminded you that your life was not entirely your own. Even the passing of time belonged to the divine. You find yourself counting the rings without thinking, your steps unconsciously matching their rhythm. A curious note found in a monk's diary mentions that fasting days filled nearly half the calendar. Meat was forbidden, and so people ate fish, beans, or nothing at all. The smell of salted herring now drifts from a nearby kitchen, sharp and unmistakable. Faith here touches the senses as much as the spirit. Devotion is tasted, smelled, and felt. Researchers remain divided on whether people were truly devout or simply fearful. Some say their belief was deep as breath itself. Others think it was habit, a kind of survival learned over generations. You feel both truths around you as you enter the church. The air is cool, heavy with candle smoke. Light filters through colored glass, scattering reds and blues across the floor. According to early church accounts, the priest's word carried more weight than any lord's. He spoke for God, and his voice could shape a man's fate as surely as any sword. You watch him now, standing before the altar, his robes gleaming softly. He reads from a book written in Latin, a language that sounds both beautiful and unreachable. Most people here do not understand the words, yet they nod, as though meaning rests in the tone alone. An old superstition whispered among villagers claimed that if you fell asleep during Mass, evil spirits could steal your soul before the final blessing. You notice a boy fighting drowsiness beside his mother, blinking hard to stay awake. She nudges him gently, eyes darting toward the priest, a look of warning mixed with love. A record from a monastery in York describes how confession could stretch for hours during Lent. The priest listened to endless lists of sins, large and small, real and imagined. You watch a woman kneel in the confessional now, her shoulders trembling as she whispers into the carved screen. The priest's hand rests lightly on the wood, his expression unreadable. Guilt feels like currency here, traded for the fragile hope of forgiveness. Experts continue to debate the balance between fear and comfort in medieval faith. Was religion a refuge from life's hardship or its heaviest chain? You feel that question inside yourself as you walk past the altar and see a painting of Judgment Day, filled with flames and angels, suffering and salvation mingled together. The faces look alive, too human for paradise or hell. A curious practice known from village records involved blessing everyday objects, ploughs, loaves of bread, even shoes. Everything belonged first to God before it belonged to you. You imagine how it must feel to live that way. Each gesture a prayer, each bite of food a sacred act. There is beauty in such devotion, and also exhaustion. Outside, the bells ring again, and people spill into the square. The sound of conversation returns quickly, as though the world has been unpaused. You see the priest move through the crowd, blessing a newborn, shaking hands, accepting gifts. He looks kind, but tired. The burden of souls is a heavy one. According to correspondence between abbots and bishops, many priests struggled with doubt as much as their flock. Some wrote of dreams where heaven felt silent. Others confessed to losing faith after years of plague and famine. You look back at the church tower, rising clean against the sky, and think about how fragile belief must feel beneath such endless need. An odd fact from a traveller's memoir tells that some people carried small bones of saints as charms against misfortune. You see a woman touching a pendant at her neck, lips moving in silent prayer. Her fingers tremble slightly, whether from cold or fear, you cannot tell. No one fully agrees on what faith truly meant to those who lived here. Was it light in the dark, or simply another rule to follow? Perhaps both. You walk to the edge of the churchyard, where rows of graves lean into the soft earth. The names are fading, the stones crumbling, yet each one bears the same cross carved deep. It feels both comforting and infinite, this repetition of hope. As the sun sets, the last bell tolls, its sound spreading over the fields like mist. You close your eyes and let it wash through you. For a moment you feel weightless, caught between fear and peace. When the sound fades, the silence it leaves behind feels just as holy. You turn away from the church and begin the walk home, the echo of the bell still in your chest. It beats softly there, steady as a heart, reminding you that faith, whether born of devotion or desperation, is what keeps this fragile world from falling apart. You wake to the sound of singing. It drifts through the narrow streets like morning light through glass, soft and haunting. The tune carries no clear words, only the rise and fall of a human voice that feels older than language itself. You follow it toward the church square, where a group of craftsmen are unloading wooden panels painted with saints and angels. Their colors shine despite the grey air. According to the records of guilds and abbeys, art in the Middle Ages was as much worship as expression. Painters, sculptors, and stonemasons worked not for fame but for faith. Each stroke of paint, each carved face was a prayer made visible. You watch a young apprentice polish the edge of a halo, his hands trembling slightly. His master corrects him with a nod, not words. Skill is learned here through repetition, not praise. A curious note from a musician's diary reveals that most medieval songs were written not on paper but in memory. Minstrels carried entire repertoires from town to town, passing melodies like heirlooms. You hear one now, a boy plucking a lute near the tavern door, singing about a knight who vanished in the forest and a lady who still waits by the sea. The words are rough, but his voice glows with longing. Researchers continue to debate whether medieval people created art for beauty or for meaning. Some say it was devotion in disguise. Others insist it was simple joy disguised as prayer. You stand inside the church and see frescoes painted in brilliant reds and blues, scenes of heaven and daily life side by side. Farmers sowing wheat appear beside angels, as though work itself were sacred. According to the writings of the monk Theophilus, craftsmen prepared their paints by grinding minerals with egg, yolk, honey, and wine. The scent of these ingredients must have filled the workshops, sweet and strange. You imagine the air thick with dust and colour, every breath carrying traces of creation. An odd little fact from a Florentine record mentions that some sculptors used their own likenesses when carving saints, believing their faces would live forever through divine labour. You look at the statues lining the church wall and wonder how many artists hid their own eyes behind marble halos. Music swells as the choir begins practice. Voices rise, weaving together in perfect harmony. The Latin words are foreign, yet the emotion is clear, both sorrow and peace. The sound of humanity reaching upward. A small child sitting beside you hums along, her voice off-key but fearless. For a moment, the centuries between you dissolve. According to accounts from medieval cathedrals, even the grandest churches took generations to build. Some masons laid only one stone in their lifetime. You think about that devotion, the patience required to begin something you will never see finished. Perhaps art is the truest kind of faith, believing that beauty will outlive you. A curious tradition among townsfolk involved painting their homes with symbols of good fortune: suns for prosperity, ivy for protection. You see faded traces of such designs along a wall. They are nearly gone, but the faint lines speak of a people who could not live without colour, even in hardship. Experts remain divided on whether the arts belong to the elite or the masses. Illuminated manuscripts and golden icons were treasures for the few, yet songs and carvings filled every village. You sense that art was never truly owned. It existed wherever hands could shape or voices could rise. By afternoon the market fills with noise. A travelling troupe performs in the square, jugglers, dancers, and a man with painted cheeks pretending to be a king. Laughter ripples through the crowd. The show is simple, yet it feels like release. In a world ruled by work and fear, laughter is rebellion. You find yourself smiling, the sound bubbling from your chest before you can stop it. A curious superstition recorded in a minstrel's notebook says that laughter drives away demons faster than prayer. You decide to believe it. For the first time in days, the air feels light. As evening falls, the sun dips behind the rooftops, turning the sky the colour of worn copper. The painters pack their brushes, the musicians their lutes. The laughter fades, replaced by the murmur of prayer and the shuffle of tired feet. Yet the air still hums with something alive. No one fully agrees on what art meant to the people who lived it. Some call it praise, others escape. Perhaps it was both. You walk past a stained glass window and see the fading light glowing through red and blue glass. The colors spill across the cobblestones, bathing everything in quiet warmth. You stop for a moment, letting the light touch your hands. The glass was made by hands long gone, yet it still glows. That is the secret of creation here. It survives its maker. You close your eyes and listen as a final note from the choir drifts through the air. It lingers even after the voices stop, as though the world itself has learned the melody. When night settles over the city, you carry the sound with you, tucked somewhere deep in the chest. In a time so full of hardship, art feels like proof that the human soul refused to stay silent. And as you walk home beneath the first stars, you realize that beauty, even fragile, is the strongest memory the past ever leaves behind. The sky is heavy with clouds that promise rain, though no drops have fallen yet. You walk through a quiet street lined with shuttered stalls and damp straw. The air carries a strange tension, like the world holding its breath. Then you see a small group of people gathered around a woman in a rough cloak. She is shouting something about healing and curses. The crowd listens, half in awe, half in fear. Records from inquisitorial reports show how deeply magic and medicine intertwined in the medieval mind. When prayer failed, people turned to charms, herbs, and whispered words. The boundary between healer and witch was as thin as smoke. You step closer, hearing her chant softly while tracing a circle in the dirt with a bundle of sage. The smell is earthy, sharp, and oddly comforting. A curious fact from the writings of early physicians tells that many treatments relied on astrology. The alignment of planets was believed to determine illness or cure. You remember reading that surgeons once refused to bleed patients under certain moons. Looking at the sky now, you wonder how often the stars decided who lived and who died. Experts continue to discuss whether accusations of witchcraft were born from fear of women's knowledge or from the Church's need for control. Some scholars see superstition as rebellion, others as ignorance. You feel the tension of both as a priest appears in the crowd, his voice rising in anger. He orders the woman to stop her. Work of the devil. Her eyes flash, but she lowers her hands. The crowd steps back. According to letters written by village priests, such encounters often ended with silence rather than violence. Yet sometimes, silence turned to fire. The records of witch trials are filled with names erased by smoke. You glance at the faces around you, some anxious, some hungry for spectacle, and understand how quickly fear becomes belief. A peculiar superstition from this era held that disease could be transferred into an object. People buried bread under thresholds or tied knots in cords to trap sickness. You notice a child clutching a small woven charm, his mother whispering that it will keep away fever. The gesture feels ancient and tender, a small rebellion against helplessness. Inside the apothecary, the smell of herbs is overwhelming: rosemary, vinegar, and the sweetness of honey. Jars line the shelves, labeled in shaky Latin. The apothecary greets you with a nod, his hands stained green. He grinds something in a mortar, humming quietly. According to surviving herbals, many ingredients were common plants: foxglove for the heart, garlic for infection, mint for pain. Some helped, some harmed, all carried hope. An odd story from a physician's notebook mentions that powdered emerald was once prescribed to calm the mind. People swallowed bits of ground gemstones, believing the earth's beauty could heal its wounds. You run your fingers over a small crystal on the shelf and wonder whether beauty itself can ever cure fear. No one fully agrees on whether medieval people truly believed in magic or simply needed it to make sense of suffering. To live surrounded by disease and death without reason required something more than science could offer. You think of the healer outside, her calm defiance in the face of accusation. Perhaps faith and magic were never opposites but twin lights in the dark. Rain begins to fall, soft at first, then steady. You step outside. The drops cool against your face. The healer is gone. The crowd scattered. Only the faint smell of smoke and sage remains. You walk slowly through the puddles, each one reflecting the grey sky like a mirror. According to accounts written by monks, rain was seen as both blessing and warning, washing away sin, but also stirring unseen spirits. You tilt your head back and let it soak through your hair. It feels like cleansing, though you know better than to trust appearances in this world. A curious little note found in an old ledger says that villagers once left bowls of milk at crossroads to keep fairies content. You notice a small dish by the well, half filled and glistening with rainwater. The offering seems humble, even foolish, yet somehow it makes sense. Faith takes many forms when survival depends on hope. The storm thickens, thunder rolling across the hills. You hurry toward shelter, heart pounding though you are not afraid. Lightning flashes, illuminating the church tower and the darkened homes beneath it. For a fleeting second, the world feels both ancient and alive, a place where prayer and magic still share the same sky. You stop beneath an archway, dripping and breathless. The smell of rain, herbs, and smoke mixes around you, sharp and wild. You close your eyes and listen to the storm. It sounds like 1,000 whispers layered together, some prayers, some spells, all reaching upward. When the rain softens, you step out again. The streets shine, and somewhere in the distance, a single bell rings. You feel strangely calm. Whatever name people give their faith, it is still the same longing for light in the dark. And in that thought, you find peace enough to keep walking. The next morning breaks clear after the storm, the air cool and freshly washed. The fields outside the city glisten under a thin mist. You walk slowly, breathing in the scent of wet earth and smoke from distant hearths. The world feels quieter, as if it is gathering strength for something new. It is well recorded in town charters and merchants' accounts that the later Middle Ages began to stir with change. Trade routes expanded, coins replaced barter, and ideas started to travel faster than the people who carried them. You pass a caravan on the road, mules loaded with bales of wool, barrels of wine, and sacks of grain. The drivers laugh as they go, their words sprinkled with accents from many lands. A curious note in a merchant's ledger describes how fairs became the lifeblood of progress. For a few days each year, entire towns turned into marketplaces, filled with goods, songs, and strangers. You imagine the sound of it, the cries of traders, the clink of coins, the rustle of silk that once came from half a world away. Even the poorest peasant might glimpse something exotic and dream for a moment of another life. Experts remain divided on what truly sparked Europe's shift from feudalism to commerce. Some point to famine and plague breaking the old systems. Others credit the restlessness of travelers and thinkers who began to question what had always been. You sense both truths swirling in the air, carried like smoke above the changing world. According to chronicles kept by city scribes, guilds rose to power during this time, shaping the rhythm of urban life. Carpenters, bakers, weavers, and masons formed brotherhoods that trained apprentices and protected their trades. You pass a group of young men carving wood beneath a shed, their laughter echoing as shavings scatter like snow. Craft itself becomes a kind of prayer here, proof that hands can build more than walls, they can build futures. An odd little detail mentioned in letters from Italian traders is that coffee-like drinks made from roasted grains began to appear in busy ports. People gathered to talk, argue, and share stories late into the night. You picture such gatherings, small sparks of curiosity that one day would grow into enlightenment. By midday, the road brings you to a bridge crowded with travelers. You stop beside a scholar walking with a rolled parchment under his arm. His clothes are patched, his shoes worn, but his eyes are bright. He tells you he has come from a university in Paris to teach in Bologna, carrying ideas instead of goods. He laughs when you ask what he teaches. Everything, he says, or at least what we think we know. According to early university statutes, learning was a dangerous sort of freedom. Books were precious, and knowledge could challenge faith. Yet the hunger for understanding spread like wildfire. Students debated in taverns, copied texts by candlelight, and whispered questions no priest had answers for. You realize the future is already being born in their curiosity. A peculiar fact from guild records says that even the art of printing had its roots in cloth making. The presses that once stamped patterns onto fabric would one day print words instead. You glance at your sleeve, rough wool speckled with dust, and imagine pages spreading knowledge across the world as easily as merchants carry spice. Researchers continue to disagree on whether people of the Middle Ages saw themselves as living in darkness or simply in transition. Some say they felt the world shifting, others that they were too busy surviving to notice. You sense that truth lies somewhere between. Change rarely announces itself. It creeps in quietly through small acts of curiosity. The sun dips lower, and you reach a village larger than most. A man sells parchment at a stall, and beside him, another copies letters with a quill. You ask what he is writing, and he answers, "A story." He dips the quill again, the ink gleaming black as oil. The word he writes next is hope. An odd belief from this period claimed that knowledge itself carried risk, that too much learning could drive a person mad. You smile at the thought, watching the scribe's steady hand. Perhaps madness and progress are closer than anyone dares to admit. By evening, you walk among the hills. The land feels the same, yet something inside it has changed. Smoke curls from chimneys, carts roll along the road, and somewhere far off, you hear the faint echo of music. The Middle Ages are not ending suddenly but softening, stretching towards something unknown. No one fully agrees on when one age becomes another. Some say it happens with invention, others with thought. But standing here, watching the twilight settle over the valley, you understand that change begins long before anyone names it. It begins with motion, with merchants on the road, with questions whispered in candlelight, with a single word written on parchment. The last light fades into gold, and you keep walking, feeling the pull of tomorrow beneath your feet. The wind carries the scent of the future ink, iron, and possibility. Somewhere ahead, the world is already turning toward dawn. The morning arrives quietly, as if the world is taking its first careful breath after a long and difficult night. The mist clings to the hills, soft and silver, and the smell of wet grass mixes with the faint scent of smoke from distant hearths. You walk along a path you almost recognize, though the air feels lighter now. It is still the Middle Ages, yet something inside you has shifted. The end of the journey is close. According to old chronicles, no one living in this age ever thought of it as the past. To them, life simply was. Fields had to be tilled, bread had to be baked, and prayers had to be said. The idea that another, brighter world might come later never truly crossed their minds. You stop for a moment to watch a farmer lifting his plough, the ox straining against the harness. The rhythm of work continues as if eternity could be planted and harvested like wheat. A curious observation from a 15th century merchant's letter notes how people began to notice small changes: better tools, quicker trade, brighter fabrics. Progress was creeping in quietly, like sunlight through shutters. You can almost see it here in the sharper tools, the stronger bridges, the faint hum of hope that seems to hang in the air. Researchers continue to discuss when the Middle Ages truly ended. Some say it was when cities grew rich from trade, others when books became common, or when a painter captured light on a canvas in a way no one had before. Whatever the answer, you can feel it now, the slow unfolding of a world that has learned endurance too deeply to let go of it easily. According to notes left by monks who lived through these years, people began to dream of distant lands. They spoke of ships that would sail farther than anyone thought possible. You imagine their faces lit by candlelight, pointing to maps filled with blank spaces. The unknown was no longer a place of fear but of promise. A curious detail from a scholar's diary tells of how one evening he saw a printing press for the first time and wept. He wrote that words would soon belong to everyone, not just priests and kings. You stand still and imagine that sound, the press thudding like a heartbeat, the first fresh pages smelling of ink and hope. As you walk through the village, you notice children playing by the stream, their laughter bright against the grey sky. Their clothes are still patched, their feet still bare, yet there is something freer in the way they move. Their mothers watch from doorways, smiling faintly. The world is changing, but not all at once. It turns slowly, like a wheel long stuck in the mud, now beginning to roll forward. Experts still debate whether medieval people were happier than modern ones. Some claim their closeness to nature and community gave them peace. Others insist that fear ruled every thought. You find yourself unsure. Maybe peace and fear always lived side by side, as they still do now. The difference is that you can choose which to feed. An old saying from this time lingers in your mind: "He who has bread and water has enough." You think of it as you pass a baker's stall where loaves cool on wooden boards, their crusts golden in the weak sunlight. The smell fills the street, simple and perfect. For a moment, you wish you could stay here, in this world where the smallest comforts feel holy. No one fully agrees on what humanity learned from these centuries, but you know it was more than pain. They learned to endure, to sing through hardship, to keep faith even when the night refused to end. You have walked among them long enough to understand that survival itself is a kind of art. You reach the edge of the hill as the clouds begin to part. The land stretches below you, villages, rivers, forests fading into the horizon. It is the same landscape you first stepped into, yet you see it differently now. It hums with life, with the stubborn persistence of people who kept walking no matter how dark the road became. The wind brushes your face, cool and clean. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell rings. The sound is neither warning nor call, it is simply a heartbeat, steady and sure. You close your eyes, listening, letting the sound carry you forward into the quiet that waits beyond history. The Middle Ages are ending, and so is your journey. You open your eyes to the present, to the hum of modern life, and realize how easily comfort hides its own fragility. You touch the air as if testing its weight. It feels both lighter and lonelier without the dust of survival clinging to it. The world you came from is gone, but the people who lived in it left traces everywhere, in words, in stone, in song. They would not survive in your time, perhaps, but you might not survive in theirs either. Yet in both, the same pulse beats, the desire to endure, to find beauty even when the light is faint. You take a deep breath. The wind smells faintly of rain and bread and iron. You smile, whispering a quiet thank you to the centuries behind you, and begin the slow walk home. Now, as you settle deeper into the quiet, let your breath soften. The journey is over, but its echoes remain. You have seen the fires,